I had completely forgotten about these events until, 20 years later, I hooked up with my buddy Rob when we found ourselves in the same unit deploying to Afghanistan. Fort Riley in Kansas is the home of the famous U.S. Army 1st Infantry Division and is one of the Army's oldest and most haunted posts. While I was a member of the Big Red One, the nickname for the 1st Infantry Division, I served as a member of the division's Air Defense Battalion. We had a live fire exercise coming up, and so the day before, we had a 2.5-ton truck called a Deuce and a Half, loaded with thousands of 20mm ammunition rounds for our M163 Vulcan tracks, which we would fire at remote-controlled drones the next day. The truck with the ammunition was parked in what was called an ammunition staging area, or ASA, located somewhere deep in the forest. The ammunition needed to be guarded at all times prior to the unit picking it up and transporting it to the firing point, and me and my battle buddies Jerry and Rob were detailed to be the night guards. We were all just privates at the time, and we dutifully piled in the back of a HMMWV along with our sleeping gear, flashlights, books, and anything else we thought we needed to pass the time, along with jugs of water, a case of MREs, and a cooler of iced drinks. We were also armed with 2 hardwood batons about 3 feet long, just in case. The driver of the HMMUV was the sergeant of the guard named Sergeant Herring. He was a short man who was overweight, out of shape, and had the reputation of being a lazy and not a particularly effective squad leader. Sergeant Herring drove us down the hard ball road out behind the battalion motor pool, which turned off onto the tank trails which led to the firing ranges and maneuver training areas, where battalions of 1st Infantry Division tanks and armored fighting vehicles regularly conducted wargame exercises. We bounced around in the back for a few miles over meandering fields and low wooded hills before Sergeant Herring turned off the main tank trail to follow a smaller dirt trail which led deeper into the forest. It was 4 in the afternoon, and the 3 of us stuck in the back of the bouncing cargo compartment of the HMMWV said nothing while we tried to get comfortable and catch a cat nap. Sergeant Herring turned around, backtracked, took different trails, then backtracked again, obviously lost. Finally, however, he found the trail that he needed to take, which led us down into a shallow valley. He was flooring the HMMWV down the winding trail, which was only wide enough to allow one vehicle which jostled us around even more in the back. Recklessly, Sergeant Herring followed the dirt trail up a slight incline which led to another hard ball road. The incline led to a low plateau with a square compound built on it. The compound was simply a concrete parking lot, about a quarter-mile square, surrounded by 2 chain-linked fences topped with razor wire. Parked in the center of the parking lot underneath the lights was the Deuce and a Half truck with the ammunition. 2 one-story shacks were built outside the fence next to the gate, which led into the fenced-in parking lot, and Sergeant Herring parked the HMMWV next to the smaller of the 2 shacks. "Get your gear and get the hell out," yelled Sergeant Herring from the driver's compartment. "This is going to be home until we're relieved tomorrow." Me, Rob, and Jerry jumped out the back of the HMWV and gathered our gear. The door to the small shack opened and another squad leader, a lean, good-natured staff sergeant with a handlebar mustache named Staff Sergeant Sleet, came out saying, "You're late, Sergeant Herring. It's almost 1800 hours. My guys are going to miss dinner chow at the mess hall. Did you get lost again?" "No, I did not get lost," said Sergeant Herring, offended. But we just smiled and nodded at Staff Sergeant Sleet behind Sergeant Herring's back. 3 other soldiers emerged from the larger shack, which turned out to be the guard shack. They were friends of ours from Staff Sergeant Sleet's squad, who had the day shift guard duty. We exchanged greetings as they piled into the HMWV to go back to the main post at Fort Riley, their duty day completed. Staff Sergeant Sleet climbed into the driver's seat and said, "Hey, Sergeant Herring, 1st Platoon will be coming to relieve you at 0800 tomorrow. They'll be bringing out hot chow for breakfast." Staff Sergeant Sleet then yelled back at his team, "Hey guys, we aren't going to make chow time tonight, so pizza is on me. Sergeant Herring got lost again." The soldiers in the back of the HMMWV laughed as Staff Sergeant Sleet pulled away from the compound. As they turned onto the dirt trail, my buddy Paul, who was sitting in the back of the HMMWV, suddenly yelled to me, "Rob and Jerry, hey, watch out for ghosts. They say this ASA is haunted." We stood there watching the HMWV disappear, and I turned to Sergeant Herring and said, "What did he mean by this ASA is haunted?" "Nothing. It's nothing," replied Sergeant Herring, sounding angry and flustered. Sergeant Herring pointed at the larger shack and said, "Throw your gear in there. That's where you three will be spending the night. You'll each be doing roving patrols around the perimeter of the fence in 1-hour shifts." "You." Sergeant Herring pointed at me. "I saw how you laughed when Sleet said I got lost. You pull first guard rotation. Get out there." "Do we have radios?" I asked. "You know, in case of ghosts?" "Knock it off," said Herring. "We don't need comms because there's no such thing as ghosts." In other words, Sergeant Herring had forgotten to bring the radios, meaning we had no communication between the ASA and our headquarters if something unexpected should occur way out here in the middle of nowhere. Sergeant Herring gathered his gear, including a portable television, a cooler, and a mini grill, and stomped off towards the smaller guard shack that was meant for the sergeant of the guard and had electricity and air conditioning. Jerry and Rob took our gear and walked towards the guard shack while I secured one of the wooden batons and began my patrol around the perimeter fence. Each side of the fence was a quarter-mile long, and a small path circled the outside of the fenced lot. The guard shacks were located on the eastern side of the fence. The north and south sides of the fence were clear of foliage, and the plateau dipped steadily about 10 to 20 feet down towards the forest. On the west side, however, the forest grew right up to the fence line. I began walking around the perimeter, enjoying the sounds of nature, the cool breeze, and the crimson sky as the sun slowly set in the west. When I turned the corner to walk the western side of the fence, however, the trees seemed to swallow all light, and it felt colder, although there was no breeze. Also, there didn't seem to be any animal noises, such as birds chirping. I completed that quarter-mile stretch, and when I emerged on the north side of the fence, the birds' chirping noise returned. I completed the circuit about 4 times before my hour was up, and I returned to the guard shack where Jerry was getting ready for his shift. I didn't say anything about how weird I felt walking the quarter-mile section of the western perimeter, and just rolled out my sleeping bag on the bare concrete floor, heated up an MRE meal of tuna with noodles, and washed it down with an iced soda from the cooler, while talking with Rob about when he was going to get up with that exotic dancer from Tiger Island in Junction City. An hour later, Jerry had completed his shift, and Rob left to take his turn. It was getting darker, and there was no electricity in our guard shack, so Jerry and I just sat around eating snacks, while Jerry bugged me about when I was going to get up with that exotic dancer at Tiger Island in Junction City. At 9 p.m., Rob had completed his shift, and I got up to begin my second guard rotation. Rob handed me the baton and a flashlight. "Here," he said, "you'll need this." "Hey, thanks," I said. Then I noticed that Rob seemed a bit nervous. "You all right, man?" I said. "Yeah," answered Rob. "It's just that the flashlight seems to go dim on the western perimeter, where the woods go all the way up to the fence." Probably just because of the trees." "Yeah, probably," I said. "Or maybe it's ghosts." I stepped outside of the shack and breathed in the warm night air, grateful for the breeze. The moon was out in full, which bathed everything in a soft light. The lights inside the ASA were lit and shone brightly down on our ammunition truck. Lights were also on in Sergeant Herring's shack, although he had pulled down the blinds. Even at this distance, I could hear the sounds of a porn movie being played on his television. I shuddered and hoped he had also locked the door. The perimeter lights were on and shining brightly on the north, south, and east sides of the fence. But for some reason, the lights on the west side had failed to come on. When I turned the corner of the western perimeter, everything seemed to go pitch black. I could clearly see all sides of the perimeter, but the western side was totally dark, even with the full moon shining. I turned on the flashlight that Roy gave me, and sure enough, it was weak, as if low on battery. The fence was on my right, and the forest was to my left as I walked that portion of the perimeter. The flashlight barely illuminated the path and trees 5 feet in front of me, and the whole time I felt as if I were being watched by something. I cursed at Paul for putting the thought in my head that this place was haunted, and secretly hoped that he caught an STD from that exotic dancer from Tiger Island. The quarter-mile walk down the dark western perimeter seemed to take hours, but eventually I made it to the corner where the forest was no longer at the fence line, and the perimeter lights worked. The moon shone brightly in the sky, and, for some reason, my flashlight shined a powerful beam of light again. Curious, I turned around and walked back the way I came, and my flashlight dimmed like before. Stupid flashlight. I completed my 4 circuits around the perimeter fence, north, east, south, then west, but always dreading the west side. As I said earlier, it felt as if someone or something was watching me from somewhere inside the inky black void of the forest. At 10 p.m. my shift was up, and Jerry met me at the shack, ready to take his turn as the roving guard. The sound of a porn movie was still coming from Sergeant Herring's shack, and Jerry rolled his eyes and shook his head. 3 hours straight, he said, and we both laughed. I handed Jerry the baton and told him about the flashlight issue, but did not mention how creeped out I felt walking the western perimeter. Jerry thanked me, warned me that the MRE chili mac that Rob ate for dinner was causing him to pass gas in his sleep, then put on headphones before beginning his guard shift. I walked into the now pitch-black guard shack and felt my way to my sleeping bag. Thinking I was too wired up to sleep, I quickly fell asleep. I woke up at 11 p.m. when Jerry's shift was over. Listening to Rob tell Jerry that the MRE tuna with noodles that I had for dinner was making me pass gas in my sleep. It was dark inside the shack, save for the moonlight streaming in from the windows and open door. Jerry responded but sounded rather worried. Scared even. Jerry mentioned hearing something on the western side of the fence, but he couldn't make it out. He said it sounded like horses and the thunder of hooves, but it sounded faint. Feeling somewhat vindicated, I said to Rob as he left for his patrol, "Don't let the ghosts get you." Midnight came quickly, and I was pulling on my boots to begin my shift. Of course, I would get the midnight shift. I met Rob at the front of the shack, and perhaps it was a trick of light from the moon, but at that moment, Rob was the whitest black guy I had seen. He didn't look at me, but kept staring out at the western perimeter. "Man, there is definitely something out there," Rob said. "Every time I walk that part of the fence, the flashlight gets dim and I keep hearing something." "Something?" I said. "I haven't heard anything." "You will," said Rob. "It sounds like, I don't know, like horses and yelling, but really faint, just like Jerry said." "Go get some sleep, man," I said, as I nervously took the baton and the flashlight from Rob. "I'll take care of Casper for you. I have to warn you, though, that you might want to keep the window open. The MRE spaghetti and meatballs that Jerry had for dinner is making him pass gas in his sleep." So now it was my turn, and it was midnight. Admittedly, with some trepidation, I walked the south perimeter fence and turned to walk the western side. Once again, as soon as I turned the corner, my flashlight dimmed as I walked that dark quarter-mile corridor. I felt as I was not even there, as if I was somehow outside myself, and I was watching myself walking underwater. Yes, it felt as if I were underwater, as it had grown cold, and the air felt thick and hard to breathe. A mist had also risen up, further obscuring what little I could see ahead of me. The lights indicating the north perimeter seemed miles away. Then, about halfway down the western perimeter fence, I heard something off to my left coming deep from within the forest. It sounded like horses galloping back and forth. It was faint, but it was definitely there. There was also something else. It was a feeling somewhat akin to panic, but it wasn't something I was feeling. It was just like I knew there was panic, but it wasn't coming from me. I completed my first circuit around the fence and almost eagerly walked at a quick pace to get to the western side. Once again, the warm night air was replaced by an almost graveyard-type cold and mist. At about the same spot, I could hear it again. The sounds drifting in from somewhere in the dark forest of horses running. But this time, it seemed closer than before, the sounds more distinct. Also, I could hear some of the horses whinnying, as if they were in pain. I tried to shake it off, still arguing with myself that this was just my imagination. The thought of horses in pain suddenly made me feel sad. I'm sorry I got you into this, boy. We've been through a lot together. I'm sorry, boy. They ain't taking any prisoners. I ran to the lights marking the north perimeter. What was that? What was that I just felt? It was sadness, but it wasn't mine. What was going on? I looked at my watch under the lights. My shift was almost over. But how? It usually took me 4 circuits around the perimeter, but I had barely gone 2. I completed my circuit and walked back past Sergeant Herring's shack. 5 hours of watching porn, really, Sergeant Herring, and headed towards our guard shack. Jerry was already waiting for me to get back so that he could start his shift. Anything new and exciting? Jerry asked. You'll see, I answered. What does that mean? Jerry asked, taking the baton and the flashlight from me. Did you hear something out on the western side where the forest comes up to the fence? I don't know, I answered. Maybe. Just be careful. I was sitting up on my sleeping bag, leaning my back against the concrete wall and trying to figure out what I had just experienced. Sadness, regret. But they weren't my feelings or my memories. I heard horses whinnying in pain, but I also swear that I heard human voices as well. About 20 minutes later, I heard a pounding on Sergeant Herring's shack. Rob and I got up and opened the door to see Jerry pounding on the door to Sergeant Herring's guard shack and yelling, "What's out there, Sergeant? You know what's out there. What is it?" Sergeant Herring never opened the door. Instead, he yelled from inside his shack, "You just shut your mouth, Private, and do what you're told to do. Stop asking me stupid questions and get back out there or I will write you up." Rob and I joined Jerry outside of Sergeant Herring's shack, and I said, "Sergeant, it's me, Private Fox. What's out there? What are we dealing with?" Sergeant Herring cursed from behind the door. "Oh, it's Private Fox. Private question McQuestionberry. I said stop asking questions. I swear if you don't shut your mouth and carry out your orders, I will write all of you up for insubordination. Now go away and leave me alone." Sergeant Herring sounded terrified. "Of all the ASAs on this base, they had to put me in charge of this one," Sergeant Herring complained. "You all will be fine. When it gets lighter, I'll show you." "Show us what, Sergeant?" I asked. "I said you'll be fine," screamed Sergeant Herring, as he finally shut off his porn movies and everything went dark inside his shack. "Now go away. Leave me alone." Rob and I offered to go with Jerry to finish his shift, but Jerry declined. "That's fine," Jerry said. "I got this." At this point, I could tell that Jerry was more disgusted with Sergeant Herring than he was afraid of whatever it was on the western perimeter. At 2 a.m., Jerry's shift was over, and Rob got up to take his place. Jerry didn't say anything when he got back to our shack and simply shook his head as Rob went out the door. "I'm not sleepy," I said. "You want me to come with you?" "I'm good," answered Rob as he took the baton and the flashlight from Jerry and disappeared out the door. Jerry rolled into his sleeping bag, lost in thought. Although we were all experiencing the same phenomenon, we didn't want to talk about it. We were soldiers with a job to do, and we would do what was required of us. There would be plenty of time to sort out what happened later. I couldn't sleep, so I went outside to get some fresh air. Loud snoring was coming from Sergeant Herring's shack. I looked to the fence line and saw a figure standing under the lights at the south perimeter at the corner. It was Rob. He was standing stark still, staring west into the thick forest. I walked up behind him. "I'm at your 6, Rob," I said, so as not to startle him, but he still jumped at my voice. "What are you doing here?" he asked. "You still got another 30 minutes before you have to be on shift." "Can't sleep," I answered. "I can't move," said Rob. "I can't bring myself to turn this corner and walk down that path." "Come on," I said, leading the way. "I'll go with you." As soon as we turned that corner, the flashlight went dim again, and the mist seemed to be chest-high now. The temperature seemed to keep dropping the further we went down the fence line until, again, near the middle of that part of the fence, my fingers began to feel numb from the cold, as if I had submerged it in ice. "Stop, stop, stop," whispered Rob. He shined the flashlight into the prevailing darkness, but it barely illuminated the trees which seemed to reach out at us. "Do you hear it?" I nodded. This time the sound was unmistakable. Somewhere out in the distance of that solid black forest, a battle was taking place. The thunder of horses' hooves, the yelling of men, the battle cries of Native Americans, the screams of the dying. It was all there, just beyond the reach of the pathetic illumination from our flashlight. I felt an overwhelming sadness come over me. Somewhere, brave men and horses were fighting and dying, somewhere out there. And then, it was gone. Rob's flashlight shone in full brilliance, illuminating the surrounding woods. The mist was gone as if it had never been there, and the cold air was replaced by a cool early morning breeze. I also realized that it had become easier to breathe again, and that the heaviness seemed to have been lifted. Rob and I looked at each other, the sadness also seeming to have vanished, and we simply shrugged. I did my 3 a.m. guard shift around the perimeter, but nothing unusual happened, nor did anything unusual happen on either Jerry or Rob's subsequent shifts. As promised, at 0800 in the morning, 1st Platoon arrived with hot breakfast chow and to take possession of the deuce-and-a-half truck and all of the 20mm ammunition. The sun was rising in the cloudless blue sky, and it promised to be a great day of shooting our Vulcan cannons. Sergeant Herring finally opened the door to his shack, appearing to be nicely rested, and helped himself to the lion's portion of the breakfast chow, while complaining to the 1st Platoon leader about how he doesn't get this new generation of lazy young soldiers. In fact, Sergeant Herring helped himself to so much breakfast chow that Jerry, Rob, and I had to content ourselves with hot coffee and dry cereal. Eager to get out of the ASA, Sergeant Herring yelled at us to get our gear and get in the back of a HM-MUV. Jerry, Rob, and I just stared at him. "Sergeant," I said, "last night you said you would show us what was out there when it became light." "Show you? Show you what?" stuttered Sergeant Herring. "I didn't say I was going to show you anything." "Sergeant," said Jerry, "you told us you would show us what was out in those woods." Sergeant Herring cursed again. "Private, I am ordering you to—" "Isn't there a grave around here?" interrupted Lieutenant Cook, the big 1st Platoon leader with the Ranger tab. "You know, Fort Riley used to be a horse cavalry post, and I think it would be a good learning moment to take these young soldiers to see the history of this place. Don't you agree, Sergeant Herring?" Yes. "Yes, sir," gulped Sergeant Herring. "Do you know where the graves are located, Sergeant Herring?" asked Lieutenant Cook. "Yes," squeaked Sergeant Herring. "Well, take us there, Sergeant," smiled Lieutenant Cook. "I'd like to see it." A visibly pale Sergeant Herring led us, Lieutenant Cook, and about 15 other soldiers from 1st Platoon out to the back of the ASA, where the woods reached the western part of the perimeter. About midway was a small trail, which led down off the plateau and into the woods. It was so small and narrow that one would easily overlook it unless they knew exactly where to find it. In the darkness, Jerry, Rob, and I had completely missed seeing it. The trail wound between thick trees and clinging vines as it descended deeper into the valley for about 150 meters before emerging into a clearing about 25 feet square. There, in the middle of the leaf-strewn clearing, were 2 grave markers, each topped with the brass image of a horse. The names on the plaques had faded, so I could not read what was inscribed on them. The morning sun shone down through the trees upon this quiet and solemn place. "Sir," said Sergeant Herring, "buried here are 2 horses from General Custer's cavalry troop. They were killed at the Battle of Little Bighorn and brought back to Fort Riley to be laid to rest." And there you have it. Sergeant Herring had given us the answer to our mystery. None of us ever talked about what happened during our guard duty that night. As a soldier, you learn to accept things as they are, whether they be normal or paranormal, so long as nothing gets in the way of accomplishing the mission. It's just something that happens which soldiers have to adjust to when performing our duties. At the age of 6, my grandmothers were still alive. I feel my grandparents passed away pretty early in my childhood, and I never really had the chance to get to know them as I was growing up like most other children I knew. Even now, as an adult, my wife and quite a few of my friends have grandparents that are still alive. I wish mine were alive so I could ask questions about their belief in the paranormal and much more, especially since my first experience was in my grandmother's old apartment. I remember it was a cool fall day, and it was the final day of my grandmother, from my father's side, moving out of her apartment. My sister, who was only 2 at the time, stayed home with my older brother. Like I said, it was a cool day out, so I grabbed my favorite red zip-up hoodie. I was excited that my parents let me come help them that day. When we arrived at my grandmother's apartment, it looked so different. Most everything was packed up and in boxes or already moved to her new place. All the big furniture was already gone, except for her bed and a table in the living room area. The table where, as a family, we would sit and roll dozens of dolma, or what others may know as stuffed grape leaves. My grandmother was a great cook. She was actually a chef in Egypt. I remember being a bit sad that all her old antiques and ivory animal figurines were packed up. Looking at them always made me feel like I was in Africa where she acquired them when she lived in Egypt. Now, though, they were all put away, all but one. My grandmother knew that my favorite was the crocodile, so she put that one aside for me and told me, "I want you to hold on to this for me today. When we get to my new place, you can set the first one on its shelf, wherever you'd like." I took it from her hands, smiling at her. "Thank you, Grandma." I made sure to keep it safe that day and put it in my jacket pocket, clutching it in my hand. I started helping any way I could, mostly taking small boxes out to the truck or picking up little pieces of trash left around, then vacuuming the empty rooms. The place looked so much bigger with hardly anything in it. A few times throughout the day I stopped to play with the crocodile in the empty rooms, or rolled around on the floor, or spinning really fast, then falling onto the floor dizzy and watching the room spin. When I do this with my kids now, my wife tells me, "Stop getting our kids high." She's a real stickler with any type of drug, rolls eyes. All day I was walking in and out of the house. I remember taking off my hoodie because I started warming up with all the activity. I forgot the crocodile in the pocket. I specifically remember putting my hoodie in the back room on the bed in the master bedroom, then saw that it was moved to the counter of the bathroom once the bed was moved. Once everything was moved out of the house, my mother told me to go get my hoodie, then we will follow my father. I asked if I could ride with Dad in the moving truck, and my mother said yes. I was so excited. I ran into the house through the front door across the entry hall. To the left was the dining room. I made a right at the living room, which the entry hall leads straight into, ran down the hall passing the half bath and second bedroom, to the back master bedroom, and into the bathroom where my red hoodie should have been. I looked around the small bathroom and found the ivory crocodile on the counter near the sink. Weird, why is this here and where is my hoodie? I remember reaching out to grab the crocodile and cold chill hit me. All the hairs on my arm and neck stood up. I looked around, then shook off the weird feeling and picked up the ivory piece. I just need to find my hoodie. I looked in the master bedroom closet, just in case it was thrown in there. Nope. I went into the second bedroom. Nothing. I slowly walked down the hall, wondering where it could be. I felt I searched the whole house, since I had already run past the dining room and living room. It wasn't in the half bath either. When I arrived at the entry hall, I turned my head right to look into the living room one more time. I froze in place, seeing something I couldn't understand. My red hoodie was in the middle of the living room. But it wasn't alone. There were 6 shadows walking ritualistically around the hoodie in a circle. Once again, the hairs on my neck and arms stood up. I don't know how long I was standing there. I was feeling a mixture of ominous fear and curiosity. Not at what they were, but curiosity of what they would do to me if they saw me watching them. My heart was pounding. I could see through the shadows, yet barely. There was no detail to them. They looked like shadows of people, but they weren't on the walls or floors. These shadows were clearly walking around in the middle of the room. Worse was the feeling I had while so close to them, not just the fear or curiosity. I could feel the malice coming from them. They were pure evil. What do I do? What if they catch me? What will they do to me? Are they going to take me to the underworld? I was only 6 years old and I knew this wasn't good. I knew I had to get out of there as fast as I could. I made a quick left turn and ran out as fast as I could. Running down the entry, I swear I could feel all of them shift their heads towards me and watch me as I ran out the door. I felt an energy willing me to stop before I made it to the door, willing me to go back. Once I hit the door, I started screaming to my mom. I ran into her arms with tears rolling down my face. I told her what had happened the best I could while crying. I remember her holding me and telling me, "Michael, listen to me. I believe you. Don't worry about the hoodie. We need to leave right now." I never saw that hoodie again. Come to think of it, I just noticed I've never bought a zip-up hoodie ever again either. I always wondered why, when I'm at the store, I tell myself or others who ask, I don't like zip-up hoodies. It's always been a pullover hoodie, and never red from then on. Weird to find that little traumatizing fact while writing this. Anyway, I'm not sure what attracted the shadow people to the hoodie, or how it was moved into the living room, or how I didn't see the bright red hoodie as I ran past the room on the way to the master bedroom. I have questions to this day about that apartment and what those could have been. I personally believe they were demons. A few times I had questioned if that was just a dream, but when I ask my mother about that day, she tells me she remembers how scared I was, and she still believes me. I was raised a Jehovah's Witness, and my mother made sure to teach me about demons and what to do if I ever see them again. I've never seen any paranormal entity since, and I'm glad I haven't seen anything since, because in the coming years, just hearing them and having them move stuff around was enough. For a few years after that, everything was normal. I'm sure I had bad dreams related to that, but I don't remember. Not much of everything else my family or I experienced ever came close to how terrifying that was. A year later, Grandma P became really sick and was put on dialysis and moved to Louisiana with my uncle, who is a doctor. I didn't see much of her after that, and 3 years later, she passed away. I really miss her. There's so much I would love to have learned from her about our family and cooking since I became a chef. I didn't know she was an actual chef until after I started cooking and became real passionate in that industry. About a year after Grandma P passed away, my grandmother from my mother's side moved into the house with us. My parents were divorced now, but they remained friends. My father lived somewhere else and my brother had moved out by now as well. The house I'm now talking about is the house I grew up in till I was 18. The day my parents moved into that house in Moreno Valley, CA, was the day I decided I wanted out of my mother's belly. Anyway, at this point I lived with my mother, sister, Grandma G, and 2 Dalmatians, Cleopatra and Oreo. I don't remember how long my grandmother lived with us, but she passed within 2 years. She actually passed in her sleep on the bed in my old room. My mother didn't want me to, but I snuck down the hall and peeked in the room, seeing her resting body. I have fond memories of her as well. After Grandma G passed away was when the activity started in the house. At that time, I was about 11 years old. I'm not sure if it was Grandma, something else, or possibly both. What went on in that house was nothing horrifying like in The Haunting of Hill House. Yet, it was still creepy and unexplainable. The first thing I remember was when one of our Dalmatians ran away. We had just bought another Dalmatian puppy and named her Sprinkles. So now it was Sprinkles and Oreo. Well, one day while playing with Sprinkles on our checkered black and white kitchen floor, the puppy stops at the hallway, starts to growl, then barks like there was a stranger standing in the hallway. My mother was cooking in the kitchen behind us, while my sister and I were on the floor with the puppy. My mom turns around to see Sprinkles barking and Oreo looking that way growling too. She tells us to go out the front door to our right. My sister and I leave while my mother stays behind. A few minutes later she tells us that everything is okay and dinner should be ready in a few minutes. When I asked my mother about this, years later she told me something was in the hallway watching us. I couldn't see it, but the dogs could. Stood my ground and told it that this is my house and you need to leave. You are not welcome here. Everything seemed good for a bit. Then weeks or months later, I can't remember, all three of us were sitting in the family room watching TV when we heard something run across the ceiling in the attic. All three of us look up and follow the sound with our eyes, turning our heads. "What was that?" my sister asked. Our mom turned to us saying, "It's probably a rat. Ugh, I don't want to deal with rats." "That sounded pretty big," I said. "It sounded bigger than rats, but not like a human. We thought that maybe some animal got into our attic." The next night we heard it again. Not just once, but 3 or 4 times. "Okay, go grab the ladder, let's go check it out," my mother said. We grabbed a ladder and a flashlight. I held the ladder while my mother climbed up and opened the attic entrance. Our attic wasn't one you could walk around in. It was full of insulation, and you would have to hunch over and watch your head for nails on the roof sticking out, and walk on the beams to get to the other side. Well, my mom looked around. "I don't see anything." The next day when it was light out, she had me go up there with her and look for traces of any animal. We didn't find droppings or nesting or anything that could be signs of an animal. The next night we heard it again, over and over, at least a dozen times. In the middle of it, I went up to see if I could catch a glimpse and I found nothing. Yet it happened a few more times after I looked and stopped before we were in bed. After that night, it stopped altogether. We didn't hear that noise anymore. Again, I'm not sure of the time in between these events, but what started next was scratching in the walls and ceiling. We thought this time it had to be rats or mice. This happened all throughout the house and even during the day. It was creepiest when we were trying to sleep. Once my grandmother had passed, my sister moved back into our old room. While I now slept in my brother's old room, we finally had rooms of our own. I remember trying to sleep when I heard a knock on the ceiling. Knock. It was just one knock, though. Immediately I felt my spine tingle all the way up to my scalp. I felt something was in the room with me. Then I heard scratching coming from inside the wall near my closet. Shuk, shuk, shuk. It stopped after a couple minutes. I laid there listening and not wanting to move, breathing heavily. I knew I could get up and run if I needed to, but I was too scared to, so I threw the blanket over my head. Next I heard the knock again right above my bed on the ceiling. Knock! That knock actually scared me even more than the last one, and I had a feeling of fear wash over me right before I heard the scratching in the wall again. Except this time, it was right above my head in the wall. Shk, shk, shk. I jumped up and ran into my mom's room. I found my sister already in there, cuddled up against my mom, wide awake, telling her about the scratches she heard in her room. The next day, we had an exterminator come and check out the place. They found no trace of any animal in our attic, and no entry points for rodents to get into the walls. He told us that there was nothing to worry about, that we are rodent-free. Well, trust me, we really wished it would have been rodents. This activity went on periodically for what seemed like years. You wouldn't hear anything for a few days or even a couple of weeks, then it would be back. One time when we were all in the family room playing a board game, we heard what sounded like a ball rolling across the ceiling. The sound went from one end of the room to the other and past the wall into another part of the house. Explain that. The attic is full of insulation and beams every 3 feet or so. How would anything roll in the attic? My sister and I became used to the sounds, and it was our normal. When friends would come over and asked what the noises were, we would tell them that we just had rats. Every once in a while, when I wanted to scare a friend or my sister's friends, I'd tell them it was a ghost in a creepy voice, and it only makes sounds when it's angry. I remember this starting before my mom met her boyfriend, and it was still happening when he moved in with us. Now, what I have yet to mention is that my sister and I never really got along. Even to this day, I can't stand her. We actually haven't spoken in about 3 years now. I've been told that strong negativity in a household could either attract dark entities or create a negative energy that contributes to poltergeists. It was bad before my mom's boyfriend, let's call him Hugh, moved in, but he was another level to the negative energy in the house. When he moved in, the activity in the house picked up. He was a correctional officer and worked nights. He had this attitude towards us, where he treated us like his inmates. He had a silver tongue, though, so at first my sister and I really liked him. When he started noticing the activity himself, he told us about all the different things he sees at the facility he was working at in Chino. Hugh tells us, "Sometimes I work the guard towers to keep a lookout for any runners trying to escape. You'd be surprised how often someone tries to run. Well, once a month we have a phantom runner. Actually, just about a week ago, I was training a new tower guard when the trainee called to me and raised his rifle. The trainee said, 'Officer Reyes, look, should I take the shot?' 'Lower the rifle, you won't hit this one no matter how hard you try.' The trainee kept aim. 'What? Why? I have a good shot and he's not stopping even after my warning.' 'Well, he's not real. The bullet will pass right through him. Watch, once he hits the fence, there will be nothing there.' Sure enough, the inmate hit the fence and disappeared. The trainee asked me a bit shaken up, What the hell? You weren't kidding. Then how would I know if it's a real inmate or the thing?" Hugh tells him, "Next time look at the pants. A lot of the ghosts here have bell bottoms." He had many other stories, but back to the house. So now that we have this a-hole living with us, the activity picks up. At this point, I am about 15, 16 years old, and things around the house are being moved around when we aren't looking. Hugh, my stepfather, would blame my sister and I for moving his pocket knives, tools, or fishing gear all the time. At first, I thought he was just misplacing this stuff and blaming us, but one day when I was home alone after school, I placed my keys where I always place them, on the entryway table. Less than an hour later, I was leaving the house to go to a friend's, and the keys weren't there. Sure, I misplaced them, right? Even though I have a strong habit of placing them there every single time I walk in the house. Well, I went and retraced my steps, looked in the kitchen where I grabbed a bite to eat, looked in the restroom where I looked in my room where I changed, I checked near the dogs' food since I fed them, and I looked in the backyard since I took the dogs out to use the restroom. Nowhere to be found. Later in the evening, once everyone is home, my mom's boyfriend comes out of his hobby room that's in the garage, yelling at me. He was yelling because he found my keys in his hobby room, and now has proof that I was in there moving or taking his stuff. I know for a fact I never went in that room. I hated going in there. It smelled like smoke, and I couldn't stand that he was ruining that room which I had many good childhood memories in. Another thing that happened was on another day when I was home alone after school. I was using the restroom. On the other side of the restroom was a sunroom that my grandfather built after we moved in. Well, on that shared wall, I started to hear a clicking sound. At first I had no idea what that sound was. Well, I got up and walked through the hall way into the kitchen and to the sliding glass door that would open up into the sunroom. Right when I got to the door, the clicking stopped. So I returned to the restroom. As soon as I reached the restroom, the clicking sound started again, but faster asterisk. Click, 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 click asterisk. This time it dawned on me. It sounded like a switch being clicked on and off. I ran through the hall again to the glass door. It stops. I stand there for a minute confused. Is it a breaker box? No, the breaker is on the other side of the house on the outside. What is that sound? I turn to walk back to the restroom, and right when my back is to the door, the clicking starts again. I turn back around and it stops. Now I'm freaked out, but extremely curious. I walk into the room and up to the wall shared with the bathroom. The ceiling in this room is paneled, so I push up a panel and find a switch in the ceiling that I never knew was there. I clicked it a couple of times, and it's the exact same sound. I tried figuring out what the switch was for, but never found out. It stopped clicking after that. Later I asked my mom about the switch. She said she never even knew it was there, and then made a face of realization. I asked her, "What's that face for?" She replies, "Well, when I'm home alone, I have been hearing a clicking sound, like someone was flicking the light switches on and off. I never found where it was coming from." I interrupted her. "Yes, that's how I found it. I was in the restroom when I heard the noise and kept listening till I found it in the ceiling." We never found out what that switch controlled, and after that day, we never heard it again. Once for a book report, I was reading The Exorcist in my room near a window. Great book, BTW. The window was closed, my door was closed, and I was comfortable and at an intense part of the book when all of a sudden my blinds go asterisk blurred asterisk, and I can see the blinds being fixed out of the corner of my eyes. You know, when the blinds are a little off and you take your fingertips and run them up the blinds to fix it. Yeah, well, the blinds didn't need fixing, yet something with a sense of humor had to run its paranormal fingertips up my blinds to scare the hell out of me while I was reading my first scary book ever. I slammed the book shut and noped it right out of my room for the rest of the day. Like I said, the window was closed and my door was closed, so there was no chance of it being the wind. At this point, I am used to these unexplained encounters that keep happening in this house. I remember on a Saturday night I was in the family room with my sister and my mom watching TV. I usually am the last one to go to bed, but that night I was feeling tired, maybe just bored. Well, I decided to go to bed a bit early. "I'm tired, I'm going to bed." "Good night, Mom, night hemorrhoid." "Good night, Dingleberry," my sister replies. My father used to call us Dingleberry and hemorrhoid when we were younger, so I kept it going once he left the house. My bedroom is right across the hall from the family room. I get in bed and fall asleep around 10:30. At 11:15 I am awakened by a sound. I open my eyes and look around my dark room. I don't feel anything in the room, unlike when the knock and scratching happens. Yes, that was still going on every once in a while, and it always felt just wrong, almost evil. Anyway, I got up to turn on my light. The light switch is right next to the door leading to the hall. The foot of my bed is right below the light switch next to the door. When I turned on the light, I see that my bed had been moved about an inch in front of my door. I become a bit nervous as that is such a weird thing to wake up to. Maybe an earthquake? I thought to myself. As I pushed the bed back, I noticed 2 pictures had fallen off my wall. One fell right behind the head of my bed, where my head would have been if the bed wasn't moved. The other actually looked like it was placed on my dresser that was next to my bed. That picture had a flap on it so it would stand up where you placed it. It was placed at an angle looking directly at the door, right where I was standing. It looked like the tiger cub in the picture was staring straight at me. I pick up the picture from behind my bed and place it on the dresser next to the other one, then push the bed back and walk across the hall to where my sister and mother were still watching TV. "Hi, honey, what's wrong?" my mom asked when she saw the confused look on my face as I walked in the room. Was there an earthquake just now?" Now they are looking at me weird. My sister opens her mouth. "Don't you think we would be up and in the doorway if there were?" I reply back, "Oh, shut up. It could have been a smaller one, just a jolt." Then again, I don't hear you screaming your brains out like, Okay, stop it, you two. No, there was no earthquake. Why do you ask?" as she gives me a questioning look. I explain to them, and we just chalked it up to another weird thing that's been happening in the house. The way I see that last happening, and why I talked about my grandmother so much before, was because I didn't get a bad feeling from that. I actually felt at ease and went right back in my room and fell asleep within minutes. Maybe it was her, or some other gentle entity that saw the picture was about to fall on me while I was sleeping, and they moved my bed so it wouldn't hit me, and placed the other picture on the dresser as a "I come in peace" signal. It's either that, or some evil entity that moved the bed in front of the door so no one could come in while it tried hitting me with a picture, then placing the one on my dresser as a "I'm watching you" signal. I chose to believe the first one. It's still creepy to think about. If whatever that was could move a bed with a 208-pound teenager on it, what else could it do? Once I moved out, I never really had anything happen throughout the years until recently. Yeah, I would wake up in the middle of the night and have this overwhelming feeling of doom hanging over me where I didn't want to move or even open my eyes. But I was used to that, and learned to fall asleep quickly so I could wake up in the morning without that feeling. Or I'd start to pray out loud sometimes, but most times it was in my head. Now the last couple of things that have happened to me were within the last year. I am married now with a beautiful wife, a daughter whom I wish wasn't beautiful, and my amazing son, not to mention 3 dogs and a cat. My wife knows about what has happened in the past, and over the years, I've found I can feel when a place has a bad entity, spirit, presence, energy in it. I've been to many apartments to check them out, and had horrible feelings, and I wouldn't even dare fill out an application for those places. Well, we just moved into a new house a month and a half ago, and I joke with my wife all the time. She is always asking if I feel or hear anything in this house. I tell her, it's not like I'd be able to hear anything with 3 dogs, a cat, and 2 kids under the age of 8. They all make so much noise I can't even hear my own thoughts. Oh no, I hear scratching. Nope, it's the cat scratching its post. Oh, I hear knocking. Nope, that's the dog scratching and its paw hitting the wooden floors. Yeah, no peace and quiet here. Well, before we moved in here, I had moved into a single-bedroom cottage to get out of her parents' house until we could afford a place on our own. In-laws? Am I right? This cottage was nice. The walls were all brick, and I shared one wall with one other person. The shared wall was brick too. The whole community of cottages was renovated right before I moved in. From what I read, in 2019, this new owner bought the property and kicked all 8 tenants out because it had become a meth community. There were gunshot holes in the roof, the place was run down, and police reports of meth labs being run out of those cottages in the canyon right down the street from Sleepy Hollow. No joke, Sleepy Hollow off of Carbon Canyon. Although I wasn't in Sleepy Hollow, and I don't think Sleepy Hollow has anything to do with that story. Okay, so I move into this place upset that I'm leaving my kids and wife, but happy to be away from the in-laws. Just my Scottish Terrier, Kal-El, and I. After a few weeks of living there, I start to hear a knocking in the wall. Not one knock like the house I grew up in. This knock came in 3s. Only knocks of 3, not 4, not 2, no more, no less than 3. While listening to this podcast, Unexplained Encounters, I've heard a couple of times now that a knock of 3 means let me in. These came during the day and night. I'm older now, I'm by myself, and nothing has happened for years, so my mind doesn't go straight to, oh no, it's a spirit. I thought nothing of it at first. Maybe it's the neighbor using hot water and its old pipes. The knocks kept happening every day and night, though. So, one day being bored. After I hear the knocks, I shut off the TV and knock back. Asterisk knock. 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 Asterisk. I didn't expect anything in return, but it knocks right back. Asterisk. Knock, 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 asterisk. Usually the knocks don't happen so quickly after the first round, so I knock again and get a triple knockback, asterisk, knock, 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 asterisk. No way, nope. I put Kal-El on a leash and I take him for a walk. I see my neighbor's car is there, so I rationalize it as, she's got to be knocking back, but why is she knocking in the first place? The next day I hear it again, and the next day. So now I do some light stalking, trying to find out my neighbor's schedule. When she's not home, I'll make sure not to use hot water, That way I know it's not her using water, and I know I haven't used it, so the pipes won't knock. Well, even though the neighbor isn't home, and neither of us are using hot water, the knocks still came. I never gave them any more attention after that first time, though. I didn't want anything to think it was okay to be in contact with me, or take things any further. I always got a weird feeling when these knocks came, but it wasn't overwhelming like I've experienced before. Well, one day when I heard the knocks going on, I turn on some music while I'm doing some pyrography. I'm listening to handpan music and enjoying it. I just started listening to handpan music 2 days prior to this day. It's relaxing music, and I put the wood-burning pen down, lean back in my recliner and close my eyes to slowly fall into a nap. When I wake up, I hear the music and feel this overwhelming sense of doom that I've felt in the past. Except now, it's worse. It feels extremely evil. I could feel it watching me. I'm awake and my eyes are open. I'm soaked in fear from head to toe. It's like adrenaline is rushing through my body, telling me that I need to get out of that house right now. I go to get out of the recliner and I can't move a muscle. All I can do is lay there, hearing the music, and feel this thing's aura taking over me, suppressing the energy it takes for me to move. I couldn't move my body, but I could look around. I see the golden sun shining through the window, but there is nothing I could see in the room with me. I feel that if I could look behind me, I could see what was there in the room with me. Would I want to see it, though? All I could do is sit there, breath, and listen to this now horrifying music. After what seemed like minutes had passed, it slowly started fading away, like it was slowly walking backwards, keeping its eyes on me until I was out of its sight, and the further it got from me, the less I felt its aura, and finally I could move again. I got up, shut off that music, grabbed Cal's and drove out of that canyon for the night. After that, I had no more experiences with the knocking or what I assumed to be sleep paralysis. Before that, I had never had sleep paralysis. I looked into the handpan music, and although there was nothing about the band that made it, I did read that others had experiences like mine from handpan music, and that you need to be careful what you listen to and what intentions the people have when they make their music. Sometimes the energy carries over into music which can affect the listener. I hear many things about sleep paralysis and how there's a whole scientific explanation to feeling the fear and seeing shadows. I really can only speak for myself, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't some scientific mumbo-jumbo that I experienced. I felt the fear before I knew I couldn't move. I've felt this type of fear before. It wasn't the type of fear I got when I was jumping out of an airplane to parachute. It wasn't even the fear I felt when I was held up at an ATM at gunpoint when I couldn't see the man behind me. It wasn't even the kind of fear I felt when my daughter was in the hospital 5 days after she was born, with a 103.9-degree fever. This fear I felt was the same fear I felt when I was 6 years old, watching those shadows walk around my red jacket. An intensified version of the fear I felt many times waking up in the middle of the night, when I felt something in the room watching me or making scratching noises. Why would a simple case of sleep paralysis give you the feeling that evil was in the room with you, so close to you that it could reach out and take your soul? Alternate, untrue ending. The next day I hear it again, and the next day. So now I do some light stalking, trying to find out my neighbor's schedule. When she's not home, I'll make sure not to use hot water. That way I know it's not her using water, and I know I haven't used it, so the pipes won't knock. Well, even though the neighbor isn't home and neither of us are using hot water, the knock still came. I never gave them any more attention after that first time, though. I didn't want anything to think it was okay to be in contact with me or take things any further. I always got a weird feeling when these knocks came, but it wasn't overwhelming like I've experienced before. Well, one day when I heard the knocks going on, I turn on some music while I'm doing some pyrography. I'm listening to handpan music and enjoying it. I just started listening to handpan music 2 days prior to this day. It's relaxing music, and I put the wood-burning pen down, lean back in my recliner, and close my eyes to slowly fall into a nap. When I wake up, I hear the music and feel this overwhelming sense of doom that I've felt in the past. Except now it's worse. It feels extremely evil. I could feel it watching me. I'm awake and my eyes are wide open. I'm soaked in fear from head to toe. It's like adrenaline is rushing through my body, telling me that I need to get out of that house right now. I go to get out of the recliner and I can't move a muscle. All I can do is lay there, hearing the music, and feel this thing's aura taking over me, suppressing the energy it takes for me to move. Although I can't move, I am still able to look around. I see the golden sun shining through my window. Then all of a sudden a shadow appears walking from the right of my peripheral and into view. I follow it with my eyes, and when it's at about 1 o'clock in my vision, I see another shadow appear in my peripheral, then another. I see 4 in my view slowly walking around me, one at about 10 o'clock, one at 12 o'clock, and one at 2 o'clock. As soon as the first one is out of vision, another one appears to the right of me at 3 o'clock. With my calculations, it would be about 6 shadows walking around me, just like there were 6 shadows walking around my red zip-up hoodie. They are back. At this point, if I wasn't paralyzed due to sleep paralysis or this thing's aura, I wouldn't even try to move. I am so scared that I could feel myself shaking. I close my eyes and count to 5, and when I open my eyes, I still see them walking around me, but now there is an extra entity in the room. It's in the corner and I can hardly see it, but it's just standing there watching me, observing me, judging me. Its head slowly cocked to the side and slowly moves his head to the other side. I could hardly see it, but I can faintly see a hat, and from the distance, compared to the others walking around me, it seems much taller. At this point, I am so full of fear that I am near crying. It feels like they have been walking or marching or trudging around me for minutes or even hours. Then I see the entity with the hat start to move close. I didn't know what to do. I closed my eyes, wishing and hoping that they would just leave me alone. I remember what my mother told me years ago. If you're too scared to pray out loud, you can pray in your head. Jehovah, or God, will hear you and he will come to you aid. So I start praying, Dear Jehovah, please help me and give me the strength to be rid of this evil that is here with me. Jesus, come to my aid. Banish them from here. I repeated this in my head over and over with my eyes closed until finally I felt the pressure release my soul. When I opened my eyes, I was able to move again and nothing was in the room with me. I quickly shut off the music and went to grab a drink. Then, of course, I grabbed my dog once again and left the house. Did I let them in when I knocked back and replied to them and acknowledged them? Were the knocks I heard and these entities connected? Why was there now a shadow with a hat? He seemed more powerful than the others. When he was walking towards me, the feeling became more intense, so that's what I'd assume. Before that, I had never had sleep paralysis. I looked into the handpan music, and although there was nothing about the band that made it, I did read that others had experiences like mine from handpan music, and that you need to be careful what you listen to and what intentions the people have when they make their music. Sometimes the energy carries over into music which can affect the listener. I hear many things about sleep paralysis and how there's a whole scientific explanation to feeling the fear and seeing shadows. I really can only speak for myself, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't some scientific mumbo-jumbo that I experienced. I felt the fear before I knew I couldn't move. I felt this type of fear before. It wasn't the type of fear I got when I was jumping out of an airplane to parachute. It wasn't even the fear I felt when I was held up at an ATM at gunpoint, when I couldn't see the man behind me. It wasn't even the kind of fear I felt when my daughter was in the hospital 5 days after she was born, with a 103.9-degree fever. This fear I felt was the same fear I felt when I was 6 years old, watching those shadows walk around my red jacket. An intensified version of the fear I've felt many times waking up in the middle of the night when I felt something in the room watching me or making scratching noises. Why would a simple case of sleep paralysis give you the feeling that evil was in the room with you, so close to you, that it could reach out and take your soul,